Now notice in this story that everyone is given a different amount to invest. To one 5, to another 2, to another 1. Now here's the thing. God is the one that distributes everything. Some people live long lives, some people live short lives. Some people have great health, some people have poor health. Some people have great talents, some people have no talents or only a few. But then we deal with what we're given. And I have seen people that had very little ability work very hard and be very diligent and be very successful in life. And I've seen others that had so much talent, so much ability, everything going their way, and I've seen them squander it and throw it away. So it's really up to us in what we do with what God has given. Sometimes we're envious of others. I wish I was as beautiful as her, or I wish I was as smart as him, or I wish I were as talented as that person. Well, look, you have what you have that God has given you, but you take it and cultivate it and use it. What does the bag of gold or the talent represent? Well, it represents many things. It represents your life itself. It represents your time. It represents your gifts that God will instill in your life, and it certainly represents your resources. So let's think about that. We've all been given certain spiritual gifts as believers. When you believe in Jesus Christ and you're filled with the Spirit, God will give you certain spiritual gifts. And addressing this, Paul says over in Romans 12, we have different gifts according to the grace given to us. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out. When you have faith that God is speaking through you. If your gift is serving others, then serve them well. If you're a teacher, do a good job of teaching. If your gift is encourage others, do it. If you have money, share it generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. So take those gifts God has given and cultivate and use them. But then there are resources. And I'm talking about money that God has given to each one of us. Now, some people get uncomfortable when you raise the topic of money, and especially the giving of money to God. But it's worth mourning. I don't even know what mourning means, but it's always good to mourn every now and then. It's worth noting, that's a word, that in the Bible, half of the parables Jesus told dealt with the topic of money, including the one before us. 1 out of every 7 verses in the New Testament deal with the topic of money. But we don't like to hear any messages about money. Why? Because we don't want to part with our money. Heard a story about a preacher in the South that was talking to his congregation, and this is one of those congregations that would talk back to the preacher, so he said to his flock, "We've got to crawl before we can walk." And the people cried out, "Let us crawl, preacher, let us crawl." Then he said, "But we've got to walk before we can jog." "Let us walk, preacher, let us walk," they said. Then he said, "But we've got to jog before we can run." "Let us jog, preacher, let us jog." And he said, "But before we run, we've got to give." There was a moment of silence, and one person said, "Let us crawl, preacher, let us crawl." That's how we feel sometimes, isn't it? But the Bible is very direct on this topic, and here's why it's important for a number of reasons. Because it's an indicator of where you're really at spiritually. You tell me you're a godly man or a godly woman, here's my question to you. Is that reflected in your finances? Is that reflected in your giving to the work of the kingdom of God? Why do I ask this? Because Jesus says, where a man's treasure is, there will his heart be also. So if you find that you're withholding from the work of God, that says more about you spiritually than you might like to admit.